So a little bit of background. I started out growing mushrooms. This was like so not my plan to become the mushroom lady. I was in advertising for 12 years and I was driving down the road one day in Auburn Hills, Michigan, and there's a really wonderful park called Bald Mountain State Recreation Area. And they had a sign up that was like mushroom growing workshop today, or it was a foraging, not growing. So it was a mushroom foraging workshop today. And it was starting in like 5 minutes. I was like, that's for me. And I think I called into work. Like it was, I rearranged my day for sure. And I just ran into the woods and joined this workshop. And it never really occurred to me before to explore that. But I was just interested. Something pulled me in, and we wound up spending 3 or 4 hours in the woods. This guy just, he knew every mushroom, and I had only seen button mushrooms. So it was just so eye-opening. And we learned so much about the million different things mushrooms can do, from wellness to food to look out for that one. And we got to the end of the workshop, and I was like, this is the most amazing thing I've ever seen, and I'm probably going to pick the wrong mushroom and die. So that led to just like a deep curiosity about growing mushrooms, because I figured that would be the only way I could safely find mushrooms that I like, the only way I could safely get mushrooms that I felt like I could enjoy and have. So I started digging, and at the time they had like the box kits that you cut open and you spray them with water. That was kind of a new thing then. And mushrooms would grow, but then you weren't like, there wasn't a way to replicate that. So you would have to go buy another box to keep doing that. So that set off just a really deep dive of curiosity. And I wound up, after about 2 years, deciding like I have to try it now. Like I've been tinkering long enough. So I tried growing mushrooms for the first time. You take a culture, I think I have a mushroom culture right here. This is a mushroom culture, living mushroom tissue suspended in nutrient broth. And this is one of the main things I make all day. You can kind of see it. But this is kind of your source for growing mushrooms, and this is a golden wine cap culture. But what happens is you add this to a grain. For beginners, rice is really great. You can just cook a bag of brown rice and put it in a quart-sized bag. And then you only add, this is a 5 milliliter syringe, and you only add about 1 milliliter of that to your rice. And then you use paper bandage tape, which this is, we use paper bandage tape for everything with mushroom growing. You're about to find out about paper bandage tape. But just like this, like the surgical tape, the paper kind, makes an awesome air filter. And you just use this on buckets. We use them to keep any germs from getting in and out, and your mushrooms can breathe. But when you're making grain spawn, you put this, a little bit of this, in a baggie of brown rice that you've cooked, and then you use that paper bandage tape to tape the top of the bag shut so it can breathe. And what happens is the rice gets colonized with this fluffy white mycelium, which is basically the underground network of the forest. You can see all those white splotches there that look kind of snowy. Um, so you get that all over the rice. And once that's all over the rice, you can crumble that into so many different things that you can grow mushrooms in. So today we're going to be going through adding your, we sent you grain spawn that you can use so that you don't have to wait for it to colonize. I love making grain spawn, but if we did that for this workshop, then you would have like this 3 week wait between starting it and then getting to start your bucket. So we start you all out with grain spawn. And so what we'll be doing today is assembling with buckets and layering those with straw. But there are a million other techniques that you can use grain spawn with. So you could do log totems, where you actually take a log and you slice it into discs, and then kind of a sandwich sort of thing where in between each layer of log, you add more grain spawn underneath, and then you just put another piece of the stump, and you more grain spawn. You keep stacking that up, and it's a great way to, kind of install these mushroom totems if you have a food forest or you just want some really cool things to work into your yard and garden that are going to look really nice. They're a little bit faster than doing mushroom logs, but then you can also use grain spawn to make mushroom plugs. If you wanted to do, like a traditional mushroom log, you can actually just get those little hardwood dowel pins, like you would get them at the hardware store. You can get bigger packs of them online. Like if you go to Home Depot, I think those packs, like the biggest pack they have is like 20 hardwood pins. So it really adds up fast if you're buying those little packs and you need about 50 to do a mushroom log. So if you go buy them in bulk, that's your best bet. But whatever you wind up doing, you just boil those for about 2 hours so they get hydrated, kills off any germs and whatever. And you throw that in a mason jar with just like a sprinkle of that grain spawn, and usually you'll poke a hole in the lid of your jar and maybe put some more of that paper bandage tape so it can breathe. You just let it sit for a few weeks and it gets totally colonized with mycelium. And then you can use those to start plug spawn. So I have an article that I just did this past year for Mother Earth News about how to do that. And there's some stuff on our site about it as well, but I'll make sure on the workshop portal page to add a link to some info about making plug spawn. It's really cool. So I've been kind of slowly over the past couple of years setting up more and more mushroom logs and having fun with that. But when you buy plug spawn, it adds up so much because it might cost you $20 for enough to do a log if you're buying it pre-made, but you could spend the same 20, $30 and be able to do just, maybe a few different varieties or multiple trees or however it's going to be. So there are a lot of interesting options. And then there's a million other things that you can use grain spawn for too. Like if you were going to do an outdoor bed in your garden, you can actually crumple that into straw. If you make like a little trench and layer, oyster mushrooms do really well in there. Wine caps do as well. Lion's mane don't like to be laying down on the ground like that, but you can use that same thing with grain spawn to do that. So anyway, that's my little spiel about grain spawn, but it is like the multi-tool that you just keep finding uses for, and it's very interesting and very exponential. So we'll be working with that today, but this is kind of the beginning of where your grain spawn would come from. And we do make kits with this culture that walks you through the whole process of making your own spawn, and then you could do a garden bed or buckets or whatever. And so this tiny syringe is actually enough to start up to five-gallon buckets of mushrooms. So it never ceases to amaze me. So let's go ahead and get our straw ready. This is always hard for me to say like what the most important step of mushroom growing is, because it's all these little steps. There's nothing that's like monumentally difficult, but they're all really important. So mushrooms are about 80% water. And if you wind up with your straw being too dry, then you'll find that your mushrooms tend to turn out like little rocks, or they'll just be too firm and they won't get very big. So we try to make sure those are well hydrated. And the other point in soaking these is, or soaking your straw at a time, is actually to pasteurize it. So ideally, you want to soak your straw in hot water. Uh, I this straw, the straw that I sent you, and what I'm using right here, I think I might have the big bag that I can actually hold up. There is a trail of straw that follows me everywhere I go. We've done workshops in like really fancy hotels, and there'll be straw everywhere, and everyone's so nice about it. I've gotten straw all over in my garden like multiple times, and they've been very sweet about it. And I don't know, there's just always straw. But anyway, so this is the straw that I really, really like lately. This brand is Straw Boss. Kind of hard to see, but it's chopped straw, and it's very, very clean. I'll show you the photo. It's very clean. It is chopped really small so that you can, which you need to do with your bucket without having to like fight with a huge amount of like big pieces of straw, which can be kind of frustrating. If I'm doing really big containers, I don't really bother to get chopped straw. I'll just do like I'll get a couple bales from the farm stand on the road. And so if I'm doing that, I will actually do something called cold pasteurization, which is a huge time saver when you're doing a lot of straw at once. Say you want to do like a market garden, or you just like growing a lot of mushrooms or whatever. You use this stuff called hydrated lime. If you're a gardener, you're probably familiar with it. Oh my, stuck in my bucket. Okay. So this is hydrated lime, and usually you use this to add to your soil as an amendment to raise the pH level up. Really useful for different types of produce and stuff. But what I use it for is cold pasteurization, and that's when you take a barrel or a bucket or a bin, and you're gonna put the straw you need to clean in it, and then you put a scoop of this in there. I usually do a 55-gallon drum at a time. We put little cooler taps in the bottom so we can drain them out easily because it's hard to move a drum that's full of 55 gallons of wet straw. So we always put the cooler taps in the bottom. But whatever container you like to use, we put our straw in there, you put this on there, and then you fill it up. You only use a little bit. I use about a third of a cup to a 55-gallon drum. It goes very far. So then you just fill it up the rest of it with cold water. And then you let that sit, usually for a big thing, I'll let it sit overnight, lets everything hydrate. And what happens is the pH level goes way up and then it drops back down. And so you have any like microbes or anything that was floating around in there that might have tried to interfere with your mushrooms or make things moldy is now out of the picture, and you have fresh, clean straw that you can use, and the lime's neutralized at that point. So it's a really good technique if you're doing large quantities of straw. But with this chopped straw, this is not true for all brands. I've definitely run into some brands of chopped straw that are less clean than others, but this particular brand is like every single time it's squeaky clean. So I'll still cold pasteurize it if I have time. Or like a lot of people, if you don't mind dealing with boiling water, you can just take all your straw, throw it in a pot of boiling water, let it all cool off, you're good to go. But we learned the hard way how much work that can really be. I helped the University of Michigan create a mushroom growing program for their sustainable living experience at their School for Environment and Sustainability. And they let us build out a mushroom growing space in the dorm basement. It was really cool. But the first day that we set that up, we had about 20 students that were helping set up, and we were boiling all this water in the kitchen. And outside, we were setting up all these buckets. So they're all 5-gallon buckets. We were doing about 60 of them. And all of all of the hot water was being boiled 2 flights of stairs above where we were doing the actual setting up of the straw and cleaning the straw. So by the end of the day, everyone was just cooked from carrying around all that boiling water. And that's really when I stumbled onto cold pasteurization. And now I just tell everyone to use it if they have a choice. But with what we're doing here, you're just gonna put this in some good hot water, let it steep. I actually just, as out of curiosity, the other day I actually steeped mine in cold water without any hydrated lime of the same kind of straw for the bucket we did on Thursday. And just to see like if any contaminants would sneak in, or if this straw is really that clean. And I have no relationship with this brand or anything. I just like am kind of boggled at how clean it is. But that was just with plain cold water soak. So I'm again very happy with this. But in general, I do try to do a hot water soak. So you're just gonna want to make sure getting this well hydrated there, and let it do its thing. I probably should have started with a bigger pitcher. We're good. All right, so let that sit for a minute and just absorb some water. So in your supply, that we'll either have a tall gallon or a square gallon, depending on where we're at in supply of shape of container. Both work equally well for oyster, lion's mane. There's a few other kinds. You can actually do turkey tail off of either of these containers really well. And there's some interesting options. Faith. Yes, so this I did is you heat it up ahead of time. You don't have to like boil it with the water sitting in there or with the straw sitting in the water. But it's also very like flexible and forgiving. Like some people throw it in the pot while it's boiling. Some people might just have it in a pitcher and add the water. I've had plenty of times where I just add hot tap water. This I actually did cold tap water because I was on a little experiment here to see I can replicate how good this bucket came out the other day with the cold. So, yes, you do have, you could heat typically you would heat the water up now and then, or before, and then just pour it into whatever your straw is in. It really comes down to like what's easy to fit the straw you have in, because sometimes you'll just have a container where there's like no way you're gonna be able to heat water up in it. Or maybe you can only heat water to a certain temperature in it. So just, it's mushrooms are very forgiving, especially oyster and lion's mane. They're just great to work with, and they're not so fussy as some kinds. There's like cordyceps mushrooms, which will actually like have to be in pitch darkness and the exact temperature and never be jostled or anything, or it will change the whole course of how they grow. Oyster mushrooms are like, come on, let's grow. You can do this. Like, it's going to be great. So there's a lot of margin for error. But yes, this would be heat the water up, then pour it in there or add it to it. So, all right. So we're gonna let our water and straw sit here for a minute. And this method, whether you have like the shorty gallon, the square gallon or the tall gallon, either way, the process is the same here. And so what you'll do, you should have a few alcohol wipes here. And can also use peroxide. I really like peroxide for wiping down anything I need to have clean for mushroom growing. It kills off a little more in the germ and microbe realm than an alcohol wipe will. So you just want to do that. But the thing with using peroxide is it can be really hard to find your skin. And so if you do that, either wear gloves or just like make sure it's on a paper towel and rinse off your hands when you're done, because it will dry out your skin so severely and just doesn't feel great. So anyway, you're just using this to wipe down the inside of your bucket. We typically recommend that you use 70% isopropyl alcohol, not higher than that, because once it gets higher than that, any open flame can ignite anything that's like a 90% isopropyl. So we like the 70%. But anyway, so I'm working down this bucket here, just making sure we don't have anything in it. That looks good. And then let's so I've got two kinds of spawn here that I'll show you really quick. So this is blue oyster spawn. So this is blue oyster spawn. And you'll see it's got like a lot of mycelium on there, and even some like really chunky pieces. And this is grown on rye. We use a lot of rye for growing different types of spawn. And then this is pink oyster spawn here, but this is sawdust spawn. So this is actually grown out on sawdust. And I don't know if you can see, there's actually little pink flecks on there, pink and white. So this works exactly the same, just is grown sawdust and works well. A lot of time if you're doing like an outdoor grow, like a totem, or maybe I don't know, even sometimes with straw beds, I tend to lean towards sawdust spawn, because you get a lot of little creatures that like to sneak in and try and eat anything with grain in it. So if you're running into that as an issue, sawdust spawn can be a good answer. And you can start sawdust spawn with grain spawn. So you sterilize your sawdust. I usually get hardwood sawdust from a local woodworker. You don't want softwood, or like pine in particular is actually antifungal. So you don't really want to deal with that because it can actually inhibit mushrooms from growing, although there are a few mushrooms that do favor the softwoods. But anyway, so I get sawdust from local woodworker, and I just keep it in big bags. And then when we use it, I do a lot of pressure cooking. So this is actually a sterilizer. The difference between a pressure cooker and a sterilizer, I actually had to learn this, and it took me, like, even after having it explained 83,000 times, it took a little bit of wrapping my head around. Okay, so this is one of All American's sterilizers. And so if you're used to a pressure cooker, it'll have that little metal, I don't think I have one over here, a little round metal gate or thing called a jiggler, which is like a weight, and it actually sits here and moderates the amount of steam that's going to come out, so that it's actually maintaining the pressure that you need to do, canning or whatever you're pasteurizing or sterilizing. Whereas on a sterilizer, it's a very similar setup, except it's got this very cool little pressure valve. And what happens is as it gets up to pressure, this very, very precisely modulates the amount of steam coming out. And so it maintains a higher core, like a more consistent core pressure for what you're trying to run what you're sterilizing at, which gets you a more effective sterilization. So a lot of the time, if you're like what I'm showing you how to do today, you don't need a pressure cooker. And then if you start getting super into it and you're making like maybe you're making mushroom blocks, or you're working with a lot of different substrates and you're starting to get into it, maybe you're growing for the farmer's market, then having a pressure cooker and using it becomes very helpful because you have more control over your quality, over your success rate, over your yields. So that does become really helpful. A lot of people are very scared of pressure cookers. I feel like garden people get it more. So I'm guessing there's probably a good percentage of you that either have one or at least not afraid to use one. But I think I probably will in the next couple weeks just do a live kind of walking through how to use a pressure cooker safely and not be scared, because it really is very simple to operate as long as you do it properly. So anyway, but this is a sterilizer, and this would be kind of the more professional next step up from using a pressure cooker. But they are super similar. I was gonna say, I'm not gonna look up the whole thing, but this is the lid to one of my pressure cookers, and then you just put that jiggler weight would go right here. So it's a very similar design, similar container. A lot of them actually, the base is interchangeable. Anyway, side tangent, but it is great to get comfortable using that eventually if you're going to get into large scale growing. I've been really enjoying using those for different stuff. So anyway, so we got our spawn. That's what I was going to say, and why I was talking about sterilizers is you can do. I have had plenty times where I've just boiled sawdust. That's fine for personal growing and stuff. I would never like put out a sawdust spawn type product that was only boiled and not pressure cooked, just because there is a contamination risk there. And when I say contamination, I'm talking about like mold or other types of fungi that you weren't trying to grow. It's very rare that you would run into a situation where all of a sudden it's like, I was trying to grow these mushrooms, but these mushrooms popped up instead. And all of this, it's more like usually you would wind up with like a mold situation that keeps everything from growing, and then you get mold everywhere else. And then it's just a whole mess that you're trying to stop so that you don't get your next round of growing cleaned up. So it's very important to just try not to let mold take over. If you notice a bucket starting to get a little splotchy, it goes out to the compost pile, and that's completely okay. And a lot of the time it'll clean itself up in the compost. So don't hesitate to just let it go recycle in nature and come back a little bit. So anyway, that's a little bit about making working with sawdust in particular. So to grow this, this would have been pressure cooked sawdust with then grain spawn transferred to it to let that mycelium grow through it, and then it's ready to use. Anyway, and you can just, if you don't want to do any of these steps in between, I just want to put the spawn and the straw in the bucket, and that's it. That's completely fine. There are plenty of vendors that sell great spawn. There's no reason not to do that if that's your like what you want to do in your comfort zone. So definitely do that. Just dive into what of it interests you. So what I'm going to do here, I've got my bucket that I wiped down, got my straw here, I've got my grain spawn here. So I guess I'll do some blue oyster here. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take about this much. I like to start out with an inch or two of straw on the bottom. And you're going for, if you're into gardening, you've probably heard the term field capacity, where you're like, it's gonna have some moisture in it, but you don't want it sopping wet so that it's gonna get too stagnant on the bottom. So that's a good amount. I pat it down. You don't have to pack it down like a brick or anything, but you do pat it down there. And then your next step here, you'll take your, oh, let me just show you in case you have, if you're using one of these, it's literally the exact same thing. You would just put like an inch deep. All right. So this is going to get equally divided throughout your container. So if you have a tall container, you're probably doing maybe just a few crumbles with a little more, like another inch or two of straw on top, and then a few crumbles all the way up. You may do fewer layers in one of these containers, but you're dispersing the same amount through the container. So here, I'm just going to take and show you. And feel free to enter any questions as we're going here. We'll do a good Q&A session at the end, but you know, if there's something that catches your attention. So I just have like this much in my hand. Got this here. You allow water to cool before adding spawn. Yes, Dave, that's a good question. So I let it cool to at least lukewarm, just because if it's too hot, it can actually kill off the spawn. So yeah, you want to let it cool. But also if you're like in a hurry and you know, you're like, okay, we did that, we're waiting for it to cool, it's not completely cool, we need to get going. You can also drain some of that off and like let it start cooling off. So yeah. So what I'll do is just crumbling like a thin layer that's on here. And honestly, the amount I put in there is kind of like a lot for that much layer. Like you can see, it's not that much, it's just like a little sprinkle of it over there. When I'm doing bigger, in general, like with containers these size, I just go for like an even sprinkle of everything. When I'm doing a big bucket, like a 5 gallon bucket, then I try to put a little bit extra in the middle. That's like the center of each circle. And that's because it's easier with those bigger containers for the core to start getting moldy. But if it gets a really solid chance to colonize with the spawn there, then there's not really a lot that other types of fungi, including mold, can do to catch up with it. So I feel like it makes my buckets last longer. Usually each bucket gets about 2 or 3 harvests out of it. Each round of harvest is called a flush, and then each flush, you know, your mushrooms grow. Basically, you do what we're doing right now, and usually after a few weeks, it starts looking like this. Not after a few days, but I think we're going to be really lucky with this one. I will be posting updates on this bucket because I'm very curious about how fast it's growing. It's just very unusual. But so you do what we're doing here, and then after a few weeks, you get a bucket that looks like this, and then you'll see after a little while, you'll see these tiny baby mushrooms trying to pop through your paper tape. And we'll just show you this really quick. So oysters and lion's mane really like to grow on the sides of things. And so we drill holes in the buckets here. And I know I've got my little drill bit here. I use something called a step bit to drill buckets. It works a lot better than a regular drill bit when you're drilling plastic, like 5 gallon buckets and stuff. So this is called a step bit. They are not expensive, but they are awesome. And what happens is instead of tearing at the plastic, which often makes it crack, it will actually just slowly, gradually drill the hole so that it doesn't wreck your plastic. So that's just a side tip. And step bit, you can get it at Home Depot, Harbor Freight. I usually buy the 3 packs from Harbor Freight and they work great. And let's see, if we get the short and wide container, do we want to put more in the center? That's a good question. You could, I wouldn't be too concerned at this scale, but I'm never opposed to like trying that. So I would, but you don't have to. One thing I do like to do is try to concentrate a little bit extra near the holes because I do think it makes mushrooms start popping out a little bit sooner. But that's just me being impatient and wanting to see them grow. And I will just go on record right now. I had an absolutely horrific dental situation over Thanksgiving week, and I'm still bouncing back. But if my teeth look much more jacked up than usual, it's they are. So we're recovering and getting back to normal, but I am definitely like learning how to not talk with a weird little lisp and stuff in the meantime. But soon you shall see me with a fresh new set of teeth. Anyway, um, so the short and wide, yes, you would want to, maybe you could put it in the center. I don't think it'll make too much of a difference, but you always could, and it is just a little extra insurance against any contamination. So this paper bandage tape is on here, and we actually taped over the holes that we drilled. This is a really good size hole for mushroom buckets. I might go a little bigger on a 5 gallon bucket, but in general, I really like this because it doesn't let too much air in to dry things out. But it does allow everything to breathe nicely. If the holes are too small, what I've run into is the mushrooms will be too heavy and they'll break off because they don't have enough of a neck to hold on to them. But if the holes are too big, then you'll find your buckets getting too dry faster. So for each flush of mushrooms, when they are ready to harvest, you will find you'll cut them all off, and I will make sure we post photos of what they should look like when they're done. With lion's mane mushrooms, the shaggy mane of it all, those are called the teeth, and those should be about 1/4 of an inch long. When they start getting longer than that, you're getting towards the less prime version of that lion's mane. You want to let it grow to about 1/4 of an inch, and that's perfect. And then you just slice that off the bucket, and it'll be right off the side, and then you can enjoy them. And then oyster mushrooms tend to have just this beautiful little cap that's just slightly curled under, kind of like the edge of an ear or something. And I'll make sure I post photos of that. But it's visually obvious when it's time to harvest them. So you'll slice them off and enjoy them, or you can put them in a paper bag in your crisper drawer, and they'll last for pink oysters or have a shorter shelf life. Those are usually I try to consume those within 4 days tops, but having them in the fridge does extend their life a little bit. Other kinds like blue oyster or black pearl, or king even, those are going to be good in the fridge for like at least a week, maybe a little longer, as long as they're not getting slimy. A lot of people come up and tell me they hate mushrooms, and I'm like, that's okay. And they're like, they're so slimy. And if they're getting slimy, it's actually because they're starting to decompose, and that's the point where you're like, now we're not going to eat those anymore. So you don't want them to be slimy. But anyway, so you get mushrooms growing. What happens is we do what we're doing now with the layers, which we'll get back to in a second. But you get them all layered in there, and you've got your tape. You put your lid on. You keep your lid on until you harvest your mushrooms. You can't be taking it off and putting it back on because you need that CO2 to build up under the air for it to know which direction to grow out of. So you do that, and then after a few weeks, you'll actually see these little tiny baby mushrooms pushing through these holes. And usually it'll be like 1 or 2 of the holes will have little mushrooms coming out of it, and then one it'll preserve sort of an inner hole. So wherever you see those mushrooms popping through, you peel the tape off, and just once or twice a day, you'll use a spray bottle or a mist bottle to spray directly above the holes with water. So you're not spraying directly in the hole. You actually want to go right above it. And the idea there is not bruising the mushrooms because they are so, what's the word? They're so delicate that bruising them can cause them to become like a little bit misshapen once they get bigger and grow into that bruising pattern. So you want to mist the outside of the bucket with water just above the mushrooms, just above the hole, like 1 or 2 times a day. 3 times a day if your house is really, really dry, or if you have a wood burning stove or something where there's just not a lot of ambient moisture. But usually once or twice a day is good for this size. And so you do that, and from when you start, like you'll see these little tiny pins, they're so little and surreal looking. And within about a week, those grow into full-size mushrooms and it's time to eat. So it's a very quick process and it's really surreal to see it happen. But you'll find you'll find those ready to go like faster than you can imagine. And then after you do that, you need to take your bucket. You'll finally take your lid off, which I'm not going to take the lid off this one because I don't want to let all the air out. But you'll take your bucket, you take the lid off, stick it in a pot or something in the sink, and then you fill it up with water. And you want to put something heavy on top to keep it from bobbing up because mycelium is very floaty. They're actually making surfboards and other flotation devices with it now because it's so floaty. But you can fill that with water, let it sit underwater overnight, like heavy a rock or a heavy book or whatever to keep it from floating up. And then in the morning, you drain it out and get any excess water out of there, put your lid back on, set it back on the counter and let it do its thing. And then after another 7 to 10 days, you get your next flush of mushrooms. And so you'll get usually like these are usually 2 or 3 flushes for this size bucket. If you're doing a 5 gallon bucket, you can expect 3 or 4 flushes for a healthy bucket. And usually like a well hydrated not moldy 5 gallon bucket of mushrooms growing, like oyster mushrooms, you're looking at about 4 pounds per round of harvest. So you can get about 12 pounds per bucket that you set up. And you don't have to use a huge amount of spawn to set that up. So it's very exponential and it happens very quickly. And it's pretty amazing how, how much, what a huge amount of mushrooms you can grow doing that. So back to our buckets here. Your water has probably had a chance to cool a little bit more here. Let's see. Does anyone else have any more questions right now? All right. Okay. So you're gonna take your bucket and I had just put a layer of green spawn in here. Call this the lasagna method. It is it's like making lasagna only with straw and spawn. And you just want to keep that, make sure you're squeezing out your straw because you don't want it to be soppy. Because what will happen that it happened a little bit on this bucket, not super bad. Like I wouldn't be concerned about this, but you can tell there's like that bottom inch has a lot more liquid in it than the rest of the bucket. And that will be fine for now. But it might get like a little stinky after a month or so. So you don't want a lot of sitting water in the bottom of your bucket. I even tell people sometimes like get to the if you get if you get to the top of your bucket and it's all filled up and you can see water pooling in the bottom, I usually just encourage people to like drain some of it off really quick before they close it. That way you don't have it just sitting there fermenting. So, all right, so you get your next layer there. And you're just gonna take this, it's not an exact ratio. I mean, the idea is that even just one little, I've got so much straw in my hand that you can probably barely even see this. This one little grain of spawn, like anything it touches, it's gonna try and colonize to. And so it goes a really long way. And the idea isn't so much to get it all heaped up in one spot, it's to sort of get it a matrix of points that it's touching in the straw there so that it can go all the way up. So the main thing is just making sure you got it nicely divided throughout your bucket. And we're just gonna keep layering it up. And the layers of straw in between, like every 2 inches or so is good with this. When I do the shorter buckets, I tend to do like maybe 3 or 4 layers total. Just because it seems to go well that way and you just divide the spawn between 3 or 4 layers. Then with the tall ones here, I'll do maybe a little less spawn in between layers, but more layers. So it's kind of a personal preference thing though. You'll find your habitual spawn ratio. So, all right. We're just working our way up. How are we doing? Uh, Work my way to the top here. And when you get to the bottom of the container of straw, you'll notice that it's just coming out more soggy, so you might have to squeeze it out a little more just because you're scooping from more loose water here. So got like, I think I'm probably gonna work in like this layer and one or two more layers of spawn for what I'm doing here. And you like to end on a layer of straw on top. So doing that. And then put that last bit of spawn on top there. But one really neat thing, not really mushroom growing related, but if you're into like mushroom hunting, or even if you're not a confident forager, but you like going out and looking for mushrooms and just seeing them. There's a really, really cool laboratory in Ann Arbor. It's called Mycota Lab, Mycota. I'll make sure to post a link. But they are working to basically discover and identify all of the species of mushrooms in North America. They believe right now we have about 14,000 species of mushrooms that are identified globally, but it's believed that there's between 3 and 4 million in existence. And when you think about, we've already got lion's mane, which has been officially proven to restore neural pathways and has potential to help with brain damage and Alzheimer's. And then you have, oyster mushrooms, which are like boost up in vitamin D when they get sunlight and have the ability to produce food out of almost nothing. And you have turkey tail, which has been in clinical trials for different anti-tumor things. It's just fascinating, the potential of what we already know. And so what Mycota is doing is working to kind of uncover that 3 to 4 million mushrooms that we don't know about. And so but to do that, they're doing something called DNA sequencing. And so what they're doing is they've got citizen scientists, which means anybody. You could be a citizen scientist. That's someone who's excited about the planet they're on, who wants to find out everything they can know about it, who is there to explore and discover. And you may not have like the Harvard microbiology degree, but you have a heart for the knowledge and information and adventure. And so what Mycota does is they have rallied just this nationwide following of citizen scientists that are looking all over the place to gather up any mushroom specimens they can find in the wild. And you mark down, your coordinates of where you found it, and you photograph it so it can be identified. And then you dehydrate it and you send them the sample. And then they actually run it through their DNA sequencing system in their laboratory and add it to their databases, where they're now starting to compile that into a very fascinating framework of what's really going on in fungi, and the infinite potential in having even just a small portion of those found and identified, can open up pathways to food and wellness, and even materials like mycelium surfboards for the future. So it's going to be really interesting to see what they do. But every year they do a spring and fall myco blitz, and that's when it's open to the public to participate and send in mushrooms that they find. So if that's you and you're into mushroom hunting, or you just see cool mushrooms and you want to share them with that project, I do try to put out an announcement email or post kind of around when they're doing that to remind people. So anyway, that's just my plug for Mycota. I'm a big fan of what they're doing. So yeah. But anyway, in the meantime, I've filled up my bucket here. Pretty happy with that. And do that. The lid on there. And then you have to let it do this for a couple of weeks while it colonizes. But that is step by step how you set this up. And then I will send out a sheet with caring for your bucket instructions for after we hop off here, but you really do just let it sit. A lot of people put these on the kitchen counter. On top of the fridge is a nice, like, kind of slightly warmer than the rest of the room place. You actually, a lot of people think that mushrooms need to be grown in total darkness, but actually they need a little bit of light to know which way is up. And so they don't need, like, a grow light is actually too strong for them, that'll kill them. So you really just like a light bulb or even those like cheapy puck lights that if you have them in a space where there's not like an easy light plug in or switch, you can get one of those battery puck lights and just pop it on for a couple hours. But a lot of the time, these are great on the kitchen counter, and you just let them sit. And one thing you'll notice about how we did these is they have holes on 3 sides, but one side doesn't have a hole, and that's true on this as well. You have the holes going around here, but we leave the back without a hole. And the reason for that is because of the number of times I've set one of these on my kitchen counter and thought it wasn't growing, and then looked at the back and realized there's a huge mushroom growing out the back that I didn't even see. So it's really just to keep your mushrooms from sneaking out and growing without you realizing and not getting to enjoy them, because they will absolutely hide. But if you were doing like a grow tent or something, you don't need a grow tent to start growing mushrooms for enjoyment and personal cooking and your family. But if you're at the point where you're like, I want to do a farmer's market mushroom grow, or maybe you're going to start supplying restaurants, then you might want to look into getting a grow tent. You can find them on Facebook Marketplace, gently used for a song. So I have a 10 by 20 foot grow tent, and I love it. It's huge. It's like bigger than I thought it would be. And that's a good thing for the amount of mushroom stuff I need to put in it. But I for a long time I used a 6 foot by 9 foot grow tent. And that was like palatial for mushrooms. Mushrooms don't take up a lot of space. So you can just plan when you're drilling your buckets for how you want to configure your grow tent. Because if you're gonna do that and you're gonna like stack 5 gallon buckets or something, then you might want to just plan where you're drilling the holes so it's easy to access. Because if you're having to like check behind buckets, or these buckets are gonna be side to side, you don't want to run into like mushrooms that are turning out weird because they're just growing in corners and stuff. Best time on average, that's a very good question. All 3 of the varieties of mushrooms we're doing for this, the pink oyster, the blue oyster, and the lion's mane, all of those do pretty well between like 65 to 75. They're all going to be okay. But each of them have like specific temperatures that they really like. For instance, the pink oyster mushrooms are originally tropical. So when those start getting into like the mid 70s, they are just in heaven. They wind up like they are a lot bigger. Their vitamin D level goes way up. They really thrive in that slightly higher warmth, and they do well. I've had them do fine all the way up to 85 degrees. And then they start being a little like, okay, we need to cool off. I worked with a program in Uganda where we were teaching people how to grow mushrooms with locally available materials. And one of the things that they were running into is lion's mane. Once it gets past about 80 degrees, it just doesn't want to grow. And so if you were growing in the summer, somewhere where you don't have a lot of control over the temperature, I always recommend looking for a heat tolerant lion's mane, because there is a strain of lion's mane that can grow in up to 100-degree weather, and so that does better if you're like fighting against some intense heat. So anyway, so pink oyster, I would say the ideal range for pink oyster is 70 to 80. That's kind of the window I would aim for, but there's some wiggle room on either side of that. Then for lion's mane, it likes to be a little bit cooler. I aim, like in an ideal world, I aim between 65 and 70 for that. Again, or 65 and 75 for the lion's mane. There's wiggle room on either side of that. The blue oyster, that gets a little cooler. That can be like 60 degrees to 75 degrees. And what you'll find with both the pink and the blue oysters is the cooler the temperature you grow them at, the brighter the colors are going to be because they really do, like, it's not just a name, they really do turn bright pink or bright blue if they're grown at a cooler temperature. And then if you grow them at warmer temperatures, they tend to be a lot bigger but a lot paler. So it's a trade-off. But as far as like if if you're looking for like this really cool like culinary plating kind of situation where you just want those sprigs of color to show, uh you steer towards the cooler temperatures. But if you're on the flip side where you're like, I want to make enough food here with this mushroom to like feed everybody and have it go a ways, then you steer towards the warm temperatures. And so it's a kind of trade-off there. But I do have a little chart that I've put together with all the different temperature ranges. And so I'll make sure that's also on the page with the resources. And I'll send a link. I think everyone got a link to that page, but I'll make sure to send a link to that like in an email so that you have easy access to it. And then, so we're gonna let this do its thing. And in a couple weeks, you're gonna have your mushrooms starting to pop out and grow. And if for some reason they're not, like after like 3 or 4 weeks, lion's mane can take a little longer than the oysters, but not too much longer. So like usually oysters, I expect them to be growing within 3 weeks of when I put them in the straw, but I don't start worrying about them till it's been about 4 weeks. And then I'm like, well, are you guys gonna grow? And then at that point, I would usually try and like adjust the temperature, or maybe stick it in the fridge overnight and take it out and pack it, or maybe just see if it's got enough air or something. But if it's a lion's mane, I generally don't worry too much about it unless you're getting past like a 6 week mark with their and they haven't started at least pinning. But anyway, so you're looking at 3 to 6 weeks before you start seeing little baby mushroom pins come out. And then that's like from that point, it's like a week until you got your first harvest. Then you soak it under water, leave it all night, drain it out, put the lid back on, and then let it do its thing again. After you've done that once, you don't really need to put tape back on it, so don't worry about adding more tape. But you should get 2 to 3 harvests out of that. All these mushrooms taste way better when they're cooked. I tasted a raw lion's mane. Someone finally talked me into it. I was like really hesitant to try that for some reason. I don't really know why. But I finally tasted it. It was like kind of just really bland, and I didn't really have anything to say about it. But when you cook lion's mane, it tastes almost exactly like crab. It gets this wonderful flavor going. If you marinate it before you cook it, it really takes on that marinade. So it gives you a lot of space to work with. And you won't find that crab flavor overpowering the marinade side of it if you wanted to take it a different direction. But what's wild about lion's mane is, it's got this seafoodish thing going on when you cook it. But if you dehydrate it, it goes completely chocolatey. And it gets this very like cocoa flavor going on. We did an event, like a cooking demo at the Michigan Science Center a couple months ago, and we made those like the classic chocolate no bake cookies. And we actually, instead of cocoa powder, we used powdered lion's mane mushrooms, and you couldn't tell the difference. It was like chocolate heaven, wonderful cookies. So you can really explore some fun stuff with flavor with lion's mane. And then pink oyster mushroom really does taste like bacon. I have a lot of fun with that with different like kind of spins on comfort foods. We have a lot of food allergies in my household, so we've already had to get very creative with our recipes and ingredients and everything. And so pulling in oyster mushrooms and honestly all the mushrooms, it's just been really fun in making our cooking a lot more adventurous and flavorful. But my favorite recipe to use pink oysters in is our mushroom macaroni and cheese, which we also do fried cheese on top, which frito is what it's officially called. But you do that with the pink oyster mushrooms and everything. We usually use chickpea noodles and a lot of good stuff, and it is amazing. And then blue oyster mushrooms taste, they're kind of like halfway between chicken and crab. They're nowhere near as heavily crab-like as, say, the lion's mane. They just have like an essence. But the thing with the oyster mushrooms is pink, blue, black pearl, any of the oyster mushroom flavors is if you eat them raw, like you'll be okay, but they taste really bland and kind of metallic. And once you cook them, it's like these flavors just develop um, and come out. So definitely when you get your first harvest, I just tell people, get a clean, fresh frying pan and just melt a little bit of butter or like coconut oil, whatever your grease of choice is, and just chop up and saute a little bit of those mushrooms until they're just a little golden on the edges, just so you can get a little bit of that flavor profile and kind of get to know your mushrooms so that you can then have fun cooking the stuff that you like. Hey Sherry, I just saw your question here. What is the purpose function of the paper tape over the holes? So the paper tape, and again, that's paper bandage tape. You can get it right next to the Band-Aids. We did with anyone's supplies, we put the tape right on the bucket so we wouldn't have to send out like a billion rolls of paper tape. But we just went ahead and taped that. And what that does is it makes a little air filter because bandage tape is meant to keep any kind of like microbes, germs, anything that you wouldn't want to get into a cut. It's meant to keep out. And so it works the same for if you're working with mushrooms. It keeps out any kind of ambient spores or germs or anything that might try and compete with your mushrooms. Because basically the mushrooms would like to consume the straw, and so would everything else that's remotely similar to fungi. And so it's sort of this big competition to what can colonize the straw first is going to win. And so the this is going to just grow all through it because it's very strong spawn. But if you had like a weak spawn, or if you maybe had like two, like a lot of times people will be like, well, what happens if I put two different kinds of mushroom spawn in one bucket? Like, what's going to happen? And they'll actually fight each other until one wins. And then the one that won is going to be like worn out from fighting the other one. And so you you try and keep them in separate containers because otherwise they will just kind of exhaust each other and you'll get smaller mushrooms or they might just be a little feeble. So the same holds true, if it's a mold spore or something. Again, the mushroom is just gonna, or the mycelium from your mushrooms that you are trying to grow are going to be trying to fight it off with the any microbes that can get in and out. So that paper tape just gives it a chance to get established really, really well. And it's just useful in so many different mushroom growing things. We use it from everything from spawn to like air filters on tops of jars where we'll drill little holes in the jars and put a little square of that on there, and it can actually make it through the pressure cooker. So it's very, very handy. Hey Lisa, I'm so sorry about the shipping, like absolutely catastrophic shipping on this week. And I think that we boxed yours up like within the past 2 hours here. It is coming, and I will double check and make sure you have tracking later this evening. But I think we're through like 95% of getting everyone sorted out. And I think we have probably like 2 hours left of packing for tomorrow morning and finally have everyone set. It's been the most harrowing experience of my life, and I really appreciate all of you who have been patient and kind. You could have gotten much more impatient much sooner, so I appreciate it. Yeah, the competition factor on the mushrooms competing really just it's surreal what they're actually doing beneath the surface. I try not to over nerd on this because I know like everyone's like, I want to grow mushrooms and eat them and enjoy them. I've spent so long working with mushrooms and obsessing over them that I've really fallen in love with what's happening beneath the surface because it is utterly fascinating. And basically, mycelium is the underground network of the forest. And so trees can use the mycelium. It's got this you can't really tell maybe you can tell, I don't know. But it's got this very like thready web-like thing going on in mycelium, the way it connects and spreads through things. And so uh, they can actually transmit electrical impulses through those threads. And it's been determined that blue oyster mushrooms have a language of at least 50 words that they're communicating in electrical impulses through that mycelium. But then when you look in the forest at all the mycelium under the floor, trees actually use that same mycelium to communicate with their seedlings. And there's so many different layers of the ecosystem of a forest that are using mycelium in different ways to communicate and thrive. And there's even different plants, like ghost pipes, which are they are a plant, but they require mycelium to have their roots tapped into a vein of mycelium in order for them to fully grow as they need to. So it's really, really fascinating when you start looking closer, like, well, what are you all up to? But yeah, the fighting fungi is definitely something. Let's see. Bacon. So yes, other types of mushrooms we can grow this way. So all of the oyster mushroom varieties do really, really well with this. So you can do you can do blue oyster, pink oyster, black pearl oyster, phoenix oyster, golden oyster, or king oyster this way. All of them grow out sideways except for king oyster prefer to grow on the tops of things. So we'll typically, for those, we don't drill the sides for kings. You can put them even in a mason jar. Or if you could do a jar like this and put some holes in the top of that paper tape over the top, that way they can go upwards, but they will all grow out of this. Lion's mane obviously does good with this. Any of the tooth fungus that falls into that lion's mane category will do well in here. So there's like bear's tooth and there's another lion something I'm blanking on what that's called. But I have heard that you can do turkey tail this way. I haven't tried it, but I'm going to soon. And turkey tail likes to grow out of the sides of trees, kind of like around it. And so they say if you're going to do a turkey tail with this method, instead of drilling holes like this, you'd actually kind of more like slice points where you would want those to start growing out of there. And then, so that's the experiment I'm curious about. I know turkey tail do prefer to have some amount of hardwood supplementation. You might want to like boil straw and sawdust together or something if you're gonna go this route without getting like too high tech and pressure cooking and stuff. But you can do a lot with that. But then you can also do pioppino mushrooms this way, chestnut, enoki. Um, let's think what else. There's a lot of mushrooms. The thing is, mycelium wants to colonize, like it likes to colonize straw and get going on there. So what you're gonna see is like a lot of types of mushrooms, even ones that I didn't list, will colonize on there pretty well. Some of them may not grow as big. Like if you have something like chicken of the woods, which is like really dependent on being on a hardwood tree and needs that, then you probably would get, if they do grow off of straw, they might be really tiny. So with stuff like that, I try to like maybe blend in some sawdust and straw, or you can get like hardwood fuel pellets and you can mix those in with maybe some soy hull pellets and you put those, I'll have to do a separate session for this, but you take hardwood fuel pellets and soy hull pellets and you put those into something called a unicorn bag, which is actually, oh, this is a unicorn bag. This is a big bag. If you pressure cook spring spawn and do it in a pressure cooker, this is what that looks like. And this bag is called a unicorn bag. Why, I do not know, but it's got a little, maybe because I have one patch right here. This is the air patch filter. This is the much more formal version of the paper bandage tape trick. But so you could put that the hardwood pellets and soy hull in there and then fill it at like 50% water. And then you pressure cook that and it sterilizes it. You pressure cook it for about 2.5 hours for a 6 pound block at about 15 psi. And then you have this like really nice sterile block. But that's like a whole other can of worms for a whole other day. And I will like absolutely in the next month or so, I'll just do like a, hey everybody, I'm gonna go live and show you how to do some pressure cooker tricks. Like it doesn't have to be a sign up thing or anything. It'll just be a thing that'll be interesting. Um, but yeah, so you can do, oh, that's what I was gonna say really quick is you can, so with what I was talking about with plug spawn, I'm really obsessed with plug spawn. There's so much cool stuff you can do with it. But you make your grain spawn. You can use almost any variety of mushroom culture to start uh grain spawn on rice. Or like, again, if you're into using a pressure cooker, like this is einkorn. I thought it was my rye, but this is einkorn, so never mind. Although it does work. But the you can start whatever kind of mushroom spawn you want on rice or whatever grain you're going to use, and then you can use that for starting plug spawn. So you can use that technique with like turkey tail, um, like reishi, any of those varieties, and you can make spawn doing that. And then you can use that to make your plug spawn. Again, you just boil those little hardwood dowel plugs and then you put it in a jar and layer it up. I'll make sure to send out a link to the how-to on that. But it is really cool how many different kinds of spawn you can make with that. Let's see. Hey, Alyssa. Will you ever consider selling turkey tail and or reishi spawn? Yes. So right now we do sell turkey tail and reishi cultures if you wanted to make your own spawn, but we are in the process of getting set up to like by springtime, the goal is to be able to offer spawn and plug spawn. Just because I like making all that stuff doesn't mean everybody wants to take the time and tinker with making it. So we do plan to hopefully by springtime, at a minimum, we'll have plug spawn, but I would really like to be able to offer a nice kind of like curated collection of really good spawns. So that's definitely on the agenda. And one cool thing about reishi mushrooms that I just found out is they can actually sequester CO2 from the air, and they can pull in like all kinds of all kinds of pollution and methane, and actually like it's something like a 70% effectiveness rate. I don't know exactly what is the percent, but the numbers I was looking at were absolutely fascinating. What you can actually use reishi for cleaning up air pollution. We've been working on some projects in Detroit where, if you're not familiar with Detroit, they have, as part of the Great Lakes watershed, you've got the Detroit River, you've got the Rouge River, and there is some very severe industrial contamination running through there still that people have been working for a long time to clean up. But I mean, like, it hasn't been that long since the Rouge River actually caught on fire because there was so much pollution and oil in it. So there's been a huge amount of cleanup initiative going on there, but there's still a lot left to go. And so we've been getting involved in exploring ways that fungi can actually remove contamination from natural environments. So like oyster mushrooms can also pull mercury out of the ground and it can eat up E. coli and it can do all these just fascinating things. Like you can also use it to create water filters and do a lot of really fascinating stuff. So that's been my latest deep dive into kind of new varieties and things we can do with fungi. It's figuring out, how do we restore the land and water in the Detroit area from ancient industrial, like not ancient, but centuries of industrial contamination. And then, on a larger scale, how do we use this to renew and restore the Great Lakes region? And then from that point, I mean, if we prove that that works, then the whole world will be like, okay, let's use mushrooms and save the planet, and it'll be awesome. Let's see, Lisa says, I know plants in general will sequester CO2 and that sunflowers and comfrey will pull out toxins from the ground. I didn't realize fungi was being used. That's fascinating. Yes, that's like completely amazing. And it's actually we were playing with the idea of like, since we're doing a lot of shoreline stuff, I really want to plant like some brownfields full of sunflowers and then use like along the banks and then use those as a growing substrate and load them up with oyster mushroom spawn and then let that all kind of circle of life and do its thing until we have it reduced down into like if there's any heavy metals left in there, obviously that's the only thing left that can't be organically destroyed, that would have to be contained. But other than that, like just seeing how all those pieces can work together. So we are working to do a this spring we'll be kicking it off doing a native fungal survey of the Detroit region to identify like exactly what our toolkit of native species is there so that we're not bringing in like stuff that doesn't belong there that's going to disrupt the local ecosystem. But I am so antsy to see what kind of mushrooms are hiding and waiting to be worked with there. Right, well, we're hitting 8 o'clock here. I'm glad to hang out for a little longer if there's more questions here. If mushrooms pull toxins out of soil, is it safe to eat foraged mushrooms? That's a really good question. So there's a couple things about that, and I actually just had a really long conversation with someone about that because we were looking at a really beautiful mushroom while standing on very contaminated ground, and it's you don't want to eat something like a mushroom off of a like known contaminated ground. A lot of time if you're in a forest, you're not dealing with somewhere where there's been a lot of pesticides or chemicals being dumped. But you do want to be conscious of like, okay, what's the history of this area? Was there previously anything over here? Because mushrooms do have a pretty strong biouptake, meaning they will pick up all like it's amazing how much they can pick up. Like an oyster mushroom can it's called absorb, which is like our normal word absorb, but then it can also adsorb, which means to kind of magnetize stuff to its surface. So oyster mushrooms absorb and adsorb contaminants. So they're like on this like a very determined mission to pick up toxins. So if you're working if you're in like a clean space and you know that this is being grown on clean materials like this straw, there's no chemicals, no junk in there and no weird residue going on, or you're getting it from land where you feel good about their agricultural practices. They're not like loading up the Roundup right on to where those mushrooms are coming from or something. That is what I concern myself with. And I also try to be, because they're about 80% water, I try to be very conscious of sort of what the condition of the local water is, because that tends to be the most telling. For instance, along the Rouge River, there's I don't know how they came up with the number, but there is a suggested limit to the number of fish you eat per year out of the Rouge. And you can eat some of the fish, but like there's a maximum that you're supposed to consume before like no more. So I just avoid eating Rouge River fish, but I if there's that kind of warning or like a known chemical spill somewhere in that area, or if it's like somewhere where it's been like heavy industrial agriculture where there's been a lot of crop spraying, then I am pretty cautious about what I'm eating out of the wild just because anything that's in that environment is also getting loaded up with whatever's getting dumped in that environment. And I developed food allergies like later in life. Like I never had any food sensitivities as a kid, not as a teenager. And then like in my late 20s, all of a sudden I was like, oh, I can't eat that anymore. Oh, I can't eat that anymore. And I had to completely relearn how to cook completely. Like, I mean, it was life altering. It was a big quest to figure out just how to eat again, how to bake again. Baked goods, it was a big hurdle, but we finally got through that. But a lot of things like those, pesticides and contaminants in the environment, are likely to be what sets off like an autoimmune reaction like that, where your body does start fighting with allergens. So that is my long spiel because I've spent a lot of time thinking about that. But like any vegetables, produce, literally anything that comes out of that comes out of the ground, I try to be very, very aware of what's going into the ground, because I've seen such a profound impact that can have on your health just overall. So that's kind of just my personal philosophy in general. But then just with the rapid bio uptake that mushrooms have to, I try to make sure they're grown very clean. So that was kind of a long-winded answer of me, but let's see, Emily. Do you have any recommendations on how to grow native mushrooms outdoors in an attempt to remediate and improve natural land? I'm buying a home with multiple acres of conservation land later this week, and I plan to try to improve the quality of the land. Congratulations, that's really exciting. And yeah, so it's I'm going to be we have it penciled in on the calendar right now. I need to solidify the date, but within the next couple of weeks, I'm going to do a live stream where I just hop on and it's like open to anyone. I just want people to be able to like hear about it, brainstorm about it, get into it. But I will be doing like a dedicated live stream talking about mycoremediation, which is the art of using fungi and mushrooms to restore our planet's ecosystem. So I'm gonna do like a webinar on that in the next couple of weeks where we can like I'll talk on it and then we can kind of do like a fireside chat and people can chime in and ask questions and stuff. So I'll definitely make sure you know about that because that'll go more in depth. But right off the bat, you can like in the springtime. Actually, I can show you. I've got my little. Here's one of them. Let me show you that this is cool. So these are actually some of my little test tubes with different samples from sniffing around over by the Rouge. And this is part of a violet tooth. It looks really pale. The older these ones get, the paler they get. It's called a violet tooth, though, I think. And they get very pretty and like amethyst colored. And they also eat up contamination. So what will happen is I will throw this out. Probably this. I'm hoping to get to this weekend, but this is going to get grown out on a petri dish in agar. And then what happens is, so you make agar plates, which like there's easy ways to do this. One of these days I'll make like a thing about how to just simply do it so it's not overcomplicated because anyone really can like play with agar and wild found fungi and do some really cool stuff with it. I think that everyone just makes it sound way too confusing, but it's really direct. So you take your mushroom sample that you got, and then your goal here, I'm just looking for a good culture to show you. Well, this is kind of a newly started culture, so there's not a ton happening in there yet, but there's a little bit going on there. So this is a mushroom culture I started a couple weeks ago. And that has, we use honey, either local honey or organic light malt extract in it. And you actually only use like a tablespoon to this whole jar full of water. And then we make these little lids. We drill 2 holes in the top. And that's a self-healing injection port. And that's more paper bandage tape. And what happens is you make this, and then ideally you would put a little tissue sample of this, like break it open and scoop with like a X-Acto blade or needle or something to get a tiny little sample from the very middle, so that it's super clean, it hasn't touched anything on the outside. And then you take that and set it on a petri dish and you let it grow out for a couple weeks and it'll turn this beautiful webby circle if it's clean, or you get little mold spots and nastiness. And if that happens, then you have to find the cleanest spot and transfer it to another plate and keep doing that till it's clean. That's the complicated version. But if you get a mushroom that you want to carry on from your space that you're in while it's still fresh, and you would like to maybe culture it and then be able to grow mushrooms out of that and keep working that into your land, you can actually get your mushroom while it's fresh. You would go through this process of making this. There's no way around pressure cooking with this. You gotta pressure cook your culture to make it right. Otherwise, it'll just be like really moldy. But you can, I mean, if you don't have a pressure cooker, you can get them like really reasonably, and they're always stacked up at the Salvation Army and the thrift shop. If you get one of those though, you have to go and get a new gasket for it. They're like $5 each, but it'll be a lot safer if you do that. So anyway, you make your like water with whatever nutrient you're going to use in it, and then you take your mushroom sample, and then you would just take a tiny little bit, and you want to do this as like sterilely as possible, but you can take a needle or whatever. Needle is best when you're working with the injection ports, just so you don't have to fidget to get it in there. But you take that, get a little bit of that tissue into like the hollow of the needle. Usually I use like veterinary needles. They're a little bit bigger. They're like a 18 to 20 gauge needles, meant for a horse. You do not want to poke yourself with one when you're working. It hurts. But you use that and it will pull in just enough that tissue where you can then inject that in here. And then you let it sit in here, and let's see. I got a bunch of like really fresh cultures sitting right here. I'm looking for one that's like really established. For you. That looks like, well, this one. This one was a little grumpy, but okay, well, this one's starting to. This one is not older than the one I just showed you, but you can see it's got, you see how there's floaties in there? So that is actually mushroom tissue that's growing out into there. So then I can just pull that into a syringe and put that into straw or into the rice, which I can then, if I were doing like specifically microremediation type stuff, I would really start that on rice and then add that to straw, and then like either do little beds where I wanted it, or you can use like we'll use burlap sacks to put them on like shorelines of water or different areas that you kind of need to target. You can also take like you have to get a food grade pipe to do this so that you're not just adding more like plastic chemicals into the water while you do this. But if you take like a large pipe, you can make filter layers where you use like maybe that mesh, like a hardware cloth, and then a layer with colonized straw and mycelium, hardware cloth, and some space, and then the same thing throughout this tube. You set it so water can run through there. You do a huge amount of filtration on your water. So that is a very, very deep dive that I could talk absolutely forever on, and I am so obsessed with that topic, and I have like 18 different really interesting webinars and videos that I love watching that I can send you if that's something you're interested in. But yeah, it's incredible what you can do with these to clean up your ground and regenerate your garden space or whatever. If you're gardening where there's in the past maybe the land hasn't been treated as well and has been used as a dumping site, or you had the neighbor that was always like working on their cars and pouring stuff out on the grass or whatever. But this is one I'm really excited to culture out. This is a king bolete. It was the biggest mushroom I've ever found. The cap was like this big, and they happen to be really, really good at picking up all kinds of stuff. So I'm excited about that. Can you write a book, please? Yes, I am. I have been doing the tortured poet trying to finish writing my book proposal thing for like the past 6 months, and they keep being like, "Is it ready yet? Can we have your book proposal?" I'm like, but I just keep having more ideas. So I need to figure out how to compartmentalize some ideas so I can finally get this book going, because I'm really, really antsy too. But I do love to write, and I write a lot for Mother Earth News, and I have this past year I did a column for Grit magazine just talking about kind of different ways to make your farm profitable or to dive into different entrepreneurial endeavors, with your family and farm and vision. So yeah, love to write. Eventually the book will happen. Thank you, Emily. And yeah, food sensitivities. I don't know if everyone can see the questions or if just I can see the questions, but Emily said, thank you. Please send anything you can when you have time. I feel like in the food sensitivities, it is a struggle, and it is. We discovered, we started using Azure Standard this past year. If you haven't heard of it, it's like It's like the grandiose version of the Schwan's Man, but instead of like getting a little bit of ice cream and some snacks delivered, you get there'll be like a semi truck comes and you have a designated meeting point and everyone in your town comes and helps unload the truck and you get all your grains and stuff in bulk. So like we were paying I think like $8 a pound for gluten-free oats, which oats are like the only thing everyone in my house can actually eat grain-wise. We use a lot for baking. So we're going through like a lot of oats here. And I can go to a Azure and for less than $80 get a 50-pound bag of gluten-free oats. So we started doing that and we got like einkorn and quinoa and all this good stuff. And so that's been a real game changer for us. Because yeah, it's a total adventure getting into the food sensitivities. Right. Well, I will make sure to send I have my little recorder thing on to make me a list of things I need to remember to send you. So I'll make sure I send any documents and interesting tidbits that I mentioned while we're going. But yeah, and then Phyllis says, hi Phyllis. When using water for any part of this process, does it matter what type of water? Is well water okay, or should filtered water be used? That's a very good question. So I'm actually like, we live out in the boonies. We are like way, way, way out here and we're on a well. And we had like one of those very like iron heavy wells. It's quite rusty. The only time the only time I worry about using that is if we've recently put salt, like within the past day or two, put salt into the water softener because sodium will fight fungi and kill it off. So I usually the only time I won't do that is if we've just recently put the salt in the softener. And otherwise, I use well water all the time, and it works really, really well. But I do tell people if you're on city water where they, maybe they treat it with chlorine or whatever, if they treat it with enough chemicals that you can like smell the chlorine, I would get bottled water for that. If it's just like if you're one of the cities like Ann Arbor or something where they like barely add anything to it, then you're probably fine just to use the tap water. But if it's like, where you can like really smell the treatment factor to it, I would definitely use bottled water. And oh, that was one other thing that was really interesting with the Uganda project. One of the problems in Uganda is getting clean water is very, very difficult. And the wells are these like hand dug wells that are not clean and have all kinds of contaminants and stuff in them. And one of the issues that we kept running into with this project was everything would be colonized and looking good and growing well, and then it would get time to start like, spraying them, and they had banana leaves, dried banana leaves hanging from the ceiling to help keep things cool, and they would spray those with water every so often to help keep it cool, which was a mold problem in and of itself. But the real problem was that as they're misting all the mushrooms, the water they're spraying on those mushrooms was like every possible germ and it in it that you can't do. So we like tinkered and brainstormed and tried to think of like a way to make it so they could use the water they had access to, because it wasn't like there was suddenly going to be this huge new water filtration system all of a sudden. And so they wound up sterilizing their water, which I mean, you work with what you have. And so that was the option in that situation. I would not count on solar sterilization as your only method for cleaning truly unclean water. But in this instance, what they wound up doing is taking that really bad water and putting it in a barrel in direct sunlight all day. And then the next day they would use that to spray down the mushrooms and keep everything hydrated. And it cut their contamination rates down by like 90%. So if you are, maybe you have like a big piece of land or like a lot of space where you're like, okay, like we want to do this in the back 40. And a lot of the time when you're like growing mushrooms outdoors, like it's rare to need to like add water unless you're in a drought or maybe you have straw beds where you're adding some hydration here and there to it. But if you're like wherever you're growing, if you're in a spot where you don't have easy access to water and you just need to be able to work with the water that's there, just a simple tip that was a really, really helpful thing that we stumbled across that wound up being surprisingly effective and allowed them to get a much, much better yield from what they're doing. So anyway, that part wasn't about tap water, but yeah, so I've never had a problem with well water though. That's always worked out pretty fine unless it's too much salt. All right, do we have any more questions here? All right, well, we are going to continue packing and shipping and getting everyone settled with anything you might need. I am the human who checks the Grow with the Mushroom Conservatory email address. So if you need anything, if you're feeling lost, if you're feeling like your stuff is lost, whatever you need, if you have questions about your mushrooms, if you're thinking about a recipe, or if you just have some like revolutionary, hey, can mushrooms do this idea, like send me a note. I am here and I really want to see you succeed. Um, if sometimes I do take a day or two to respond, it's just because I don't have like a VA or a secretary and we're kind of learning, like we just keep growing and we're learning. So I think it is time to find that person to help kind of juggle messages and make sure people have a quick communicator, but I don't think I'll ever stop being and having my nose in the inbox there because I just love connecting with all of you and anyone who's excited about mushrooms. It's just always a fantastic conversation. And oh, thank you, Lisa. I really appreciate that. But yeah, so anyway, I love hearing from y'all and I'm really excited to see how your mushrooms turn out. So like do please send photos and I'll try and remember to put like a little upload thing or just tag us on Facebook with how they're going. But I don't know, we're here. So anyway, I will make sure we send out a recording of this session. If you didn't already get the recording of the last session, I did post that on our YouTube. That's youtube.com, the Mushroom Conservatory. And then we are going to do, because there's still a few people in the queue that are waiting for their supplies, we are going to do one more round of this on December 27th. That's not the day after Christmas, because I was like, no one wants to think about doing something the day after Christmas. It's 2 days after Christmas. We're gonna do that at 4:30 p.m. So it's just sort of like a afternoon laid back session. Just so that anyone who needs who wants to walk through, the bucket setup live or ask questions can connect. Anyone who's already participated can reconnect. And I mean, it's always so surreal to see the conversations that come up. Literally tonight, we had a completely different discussion than we did and then we did on Thursday, and somehow we still covered like everything we needed to, and just had amazing things to cover. So that was really cool. But anyway, so definitely, even though you made it this evening, if you feel like joining us on the 27th, that's going to be a really nice time and good way to kick off the new year. So anyway, thank you, Phyllis. And yeah, thank you all for being part of this. I don't think anyone's done an online mushroom growing program of this size or scope before, and it's just kind of cool to see it all unfolding. So I'm grateful for all of you and have a wonderful, wonderful evening. And if I don't talk to you before then, very happy holidays.